Welcome back to West Texas View.
Before the break, Loretta was just about to read a little excerpt from her book that describes how these women dressed as pilots in the 60s. So, in the 50s. So, would you read that?
Yes, thank you. In fact, the beginning of chapter 1 is an overview to the book. It's titled "We Were Oddities," which was a quote from one of the women. It begins with a question and a quote. "Did you fly that plane in here?" It was a question asked over and over of women pilots back in the day before they were accepted as equals to their male counterparts. Even in 1957, when a group of Abilene women received their charter for a chapter of the 99s Incorporated, an international organization for women pilots, stares were commonplace. The puzzled looks were somewhat understandable considering how the women likely were dressed when they stepped out of the cockpit. Instead of something sensible like a flight suit, women pilots of the 1950s dressed like women dressed almost every day in the 1950s, to the nines. And then I go on to explain that that was not unusual. If you look at what was on television at the time, Father Knows Best, yes. Queen for a Day, those types of shows, women were always dressed to the nines. Women dressed, they wore hats, gloves, heels, stockings, tailored suits. They always looked like they were going to church, no matter where they were going. And that's the way these women flew. So it added to the oddity that they were women pilots, but also they stepped out of the cockpit dressed like this, and so they got a lot of stares and comments. But I just love that comment that they said they heard over and over again. They were the only one in the plane. They stepped out of the cockpit. There was nobody else there, and still someone would say, "Did you fly that plane in here?" Like, obviously
this
she
can't
did.
be. This can't be. But let's talk about some of these women, just their backgrounds, because I know that one of them that was categorized in here as a woman who gave a lot to her community, but in the meantime, she was a very, very busy lawyer, a very busy member of this firm that did work all over the nation. And so she was flying out for business, but then they also went for pleasure.
They did.
They went somewhere just for a shopping trip. They went to California for tea with somebody.
About once a month, they would just take off and go somewhere for fun. And they would all take their own plane, so we'd have, 6, 7, 10 planes, kind of a convoy. A favorite place was Lowakey Steakhouse. I'm sure everybody knows about that. And some of the funny stories about that were there's some low-hanging telephone lines where they had to land, and they had to show great skill to miss those telephone lines. And so they kind of got some practice in with their takeoffs and landings by going there. They went to Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, a number of places. They'd go for lunch, just go somewhere to eat lunch and come home, or they'd go shopping and come back. Just outings like most of us would get in a car and go somewhere and do that. But they loved to fly, so they would all get in their planes and take off and go somewhere.
And there was one mention in here about how much planes cost then. And they were very inexpensive.
Well, compared to now, they were, but even so, it was an expensive hobby. They had to be able to afford it. And some of them said eventually that was one of the factors that played into that they eventually quit flying, maybe for family reasons, or there were just other things that were time consuming, but the expense of it was also a factor. It's an expensive hobby to keep up.
And the fact that these women were connected to the women in Midland, who flew, that were connected to the women in Dallas and other communities because there were several 99s.
There are 99s.
organizations.
Of course, the 99s still exist today. Their international headquarters and museum is located on the grounds of the airport in Oklahoma City, and in fact, I went there to do some research. At one time, there was an active chapter in Midland in this area. I don't think it's active now, but at one time there was, and so all these women knew each other. They had, they called them sectionals, that were kind of regional meetings, fly-ins, where they would go, they would have meetings, presentations, demonstrations, various things, just kind of get-togethers.
So it was a real sorority.
It was.
Sisters
It was. That's exactly right. They were sisters, and they were all oddities, as they said, and so there was a camaraderie, a bonding among them that remains today.
And all of these little towns in our West Texas area, I think a lot of people would be surprised if they did a little digging and saw how many women in their communities over the years had been pilots.
I think
even
so too.
in little places like Crane or Seminole or places like that, you're going to find someone that was.
In fact, that reminds me of something interesting that these women did as kind of service projects. They went to small towns where some of them lived, or maybe not, but where there was an airstrip, and they would paint the name of the town, like on top of a school gym or a barn or someplace.
That was used by the pilots as
could see
kind of a guide to where they were. Yeah. And they put, what was the symbol that they used?
A compass rose. They painted those on runways at airports. That's in fact, I was told that pilots, even with all the technology we have today, that pilots still use those sometimes. It's painted on a runway where they can line the plane up to get a true north positioning. And that was one of the projects that they did.
Well, one of the things that I wanted Loretta to come on for is because not only is it an interesting book that I think many of you are going to want copies of, and contact me or contact her through her webpage, and through her email, and you can find out where you can get copies. But the other reason that I wanted you to hear from her is because when she was here a little over a year ago, she had so many. We talked about the process of writing a book and what all is involved in it. And we had so many comments about that. So next Sunday, she's going to come back and we're going to talk about that. We'll see you next Sunday with a continuation of this program.
Thanks for joining us for News West 9's West Texas View with Johnny Lou Avery. This has been a public affairs presentation of KWAB-TV and KWES-TV.